Hey there! If you know me, you know I have an NBA matrix that ranks every player that played a minimum of 30 games in an NBA regular season. And if you don't, well, here's an explanation of how that matrix works. The matrix is built up of 3 core categories, or sometimes we call them pillars. Those categories or pillars are the writer's poll, a stats matrix, and an awards matrix. After those are all calculated, we take the average scores across the 3 of them, and then do a rings adjustment. Now, an important thing to know about the matrix is it's just that. It's a matrix. It's a calculation. It doesn't know the context of when a player played, who he played with. It just knows what he did. And it doesn't even quite know that. It just knows the numbers that he put up and the awards that he won. I still find it a really useful tool when I'm trying to figure out, hey, who are the top 50 shooting guards of all time? Well, I can pull the top 100 from that and then look to add some context to it all. So first, let's start looking at those 3 categories, and we're going to start off with the writer's poll. Now, if you're around NBA circles, I'm sure you've heard of Bill Simmons, you may have read the book of basketball, and that's just what we're looking for. We're looking for writers that took the time, who dove in deep, and tried to figure out a top 100, top 75, doesn't matter what top number it is, we're going to try to go with it. We'll also draw from key publications from ESPN, The Athletic, Sports Illustrated, but we do try to keep everything to the last 5 years. So unfortunately, Bill Simmons, your book of basketball, has been bumped out because it's just no longer up to date. The matrix takes these rankings, averages them out, gives us a new ranking, kind of a cumulative ranking, and that's a solid baseline. Anybody who wasn't ranked gets the score of 120. This is pretty good for most players, but every now and then you have a player who rises up the rankings so fast that he's just not on publications' national rankings when he really should be. Nikola Jokic, for instance. He was not on any of the ESPN, Athletic, none of their rankings the last couple of years. So we took the average score of 120 and averaged it out with what Aaron and I ranked in our top 200 rankings for him. Now, one big drawback to the writers' poll is there's a lot of bias in this. Who are these writers? How much time did they put into this? Were they just trying to meet a deadline and push out something for ESPN? There's a lot that fluctuates and varies with this. There's also wild spikes, when one list falls off, someone that replaces it. There's just a lot of fluctuation. Also, they only rank like 100 guys. So overall, it's probably the weakest of the pillars, but it's a good baseline to have. And here are the top 10 from just that pillar. Our second pillar is the awards pillar, where we've assigned a point system to each of the awards that somewhat tells us how a player is ranked. And what do I mean by tell us how a player is ranked? Is in general, a All-NBA first team is a top 5 player, second team is top 10, third team top 15, All-Star top 24, MVP the best. We all know that that is not 100% accurate. There are All-Stars that make it over guys that shouldn't have, but in the grand scheme of things, All-Stars are generally better than non-All-Stars. The 24 that make it are better than the 400 that didn't on average. So we have this assigned rankings. And here are the scores that we put out for each of those different types of rankings. You'll note that we broke up MVP into 2 different spots, MVP and the MVP shares. So if you have a unanimous MVP like Curry, that's 7 points. If you got about 50% of the vote like Nash, that's 5 points. Also, guys who don't get, MVPs, but are consistently second or third, still get points and awards for that. You'll also note that from 68 to 76, we had to cut the awards by basically a third off, or only 2/3 of their initial value. That's because we have both the NBA and the ABA running at the same time. If we just took the straight awards from both leagues, then we'd have 2 MVPs every year, 10 All-NBA first teams, and it looks like the 70s is the greatest decade of basketball. You'll also note certain awards like the Defensive Awards, or Rookie of the Year, or, Sixth Man of the Year, are not included in this, and that's because they don't tell us much about a player's rank in the league. Defensive Player of the Year is a great award. It tells us that this was, in theory, the best defensive player of the year, but that doesn't tell me if he's better or worse than, say, an All-Star. We just had Marcus Smart win DPOY. It also doesn't tell us if he's better or worse than other All-Stars. We had Rudy Gobert win it a number of times. If we give him points for that, is he better than your average other All-Star? We don't know. But what we do know is there was a time where the All-NBA centers were Jokic, Embiid, Gobert. If we give Gobert points for, winning DPOY, it might flip that order. And I think we can all agree that was more or less the correct order. So that's how the awards pillar works, and this is the top 10 that we get from the awards pillar. The last pillar is potentially the most complicated because we needed a pillar that can both rank the differences between a Kobe, a Duncan, and a Nash, as well as rank players as different as George Mikan is to Nikola Jokic. That is very limiting, so we're only able to use kind of two key stat metrics. And one is per game numbers, points, rebounds, assists, and the other is win shares. We also had discussions last summer on my TikTok channel of what do we really care about? Do we want, more longevity? Do we want more peak? And it was decided that peak mattered more than longevity. And so that left us with this kind of breakdown. We are going to wait. We're going to have assists be worth a little bit more, rebounds be worth a little bit less for defensive, a little bit more for offensive. Before they split them up, we just take off a little bit. Also, regular season win shares aren't quite as impressive as playoff win shares. You go deep in the playoffs, all of those wins matter a lot more. And then to account for peak over longevity, we're looking at the best season for a guy, we're looking at their 3 best seasons, and we're looking at their 5 best seasons. That's going to account for 2/3 of their ranking, both in this combined points, rebounds, assists, and in win shares. And for the longevity aspect, because this still does matter, we'll take the better of a player's 10-year averages or their career totals. And one of the reasons why I do this is because there's always that debate. Hey, if a guy just kind of stays on and plays like Dirk at the end of his career, he's adding more totals but lowering his career averages. After 10 years, I don't really care that much about what your averages are. If you were good for 10 years, that's impressive to me. But also some players just have amazing career totals, so they're going to get the better of whatever those rankings are. And in the end, if we were to look at just our stats pillar, this would be our top 10. And you'll see, definitely not perfect, and that's why we average these out. Once we have our rankings across all 3 pillars, we take the average of that, and then we adjust for the championship rings. That way, when we look at a Robert Horry, we have Robert Horry's career, we've got his stats and awards and whatnot, and then we look at his rings at the end. So he's compared to other role players, basically in his category, and he's adjusted by the rings around them. And the way that adjustment works is we take whatever your average rank is, we'll minus off the number of rings to lower your rank or improve it, and then if you haven't won any rings, we will add 5 to it. So if you were 10th, 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 your average score is 10th across the 3 categories, you won 2 rings, that drops it down to an average score of 8. You didn't win a ring, you get the +5, you're at 15. It keeps everyone clustered, ballparked by their numbers, and the big difference at the end is just, hey, if we've got 2 guys that are basically the same, the one with more rings is better. And all that to say, this ends up being our top 20. Is it perfect? No, I disagree. Duncan's at 11, I have him at 5 in my personal rankings. But it does a really good job of clustering players in a ballpark near where they should be. And the big advantage of this is that it can be applied to every player in NBA, ABA history.